Okay, I think we are live. It happened quickly, so we can double check that, but I'm going to proceed as if we are. So I want to welcome everybody to this. Yeah, it says live in the side. That always makes me feel good. Happy Friday, everybody. If you're in the United States, it's Friday. It might be somewhere else if you're in Australia or other places. I'm Jennifer Kahnweiler. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to my fabulous guest, Candace Dobie, for this brand new series that I'm starting. And, I built on, as some of you know, I'm an introverted person. I'm not an introverted person, excuse me, a pioneer in the introvert revolution. And I like to highlight the voices of fantastic people in my world and some that I don't know who are really walking the talk of being successful, not changing who they are, but actually using their strengths as introverts. And I did a series on introverted leaders around the world that was very well received. And I thought about my next venture in this arena. And what occurred to me is that there are so many women's voices that, in a lot of areas, we're really not hearing from. When you read articles about introverted leadership or introverts, people will always include in those articles examples of introverts. And it's rare that a woman is mentioned. And of course, that got my shackles up, and I decided I'm going to focus in this series on just fantastic women. You might not realize people like Stacey Abrams and, Naomi Osaka, Ariana Huffington, even Oprah, people are surprised, are introverts. And there's just so many more that we could list. So I'm going to introduce you now to my first guest, who was kind enough to go through all of the the fits and starts. Candace Dobie, who's used to me. We have wonderful conversations. Candace, let me tell you a little bit about her. Is an Atlanta-based speaker, and she is an author, and she coaches people in courage. She works with universities and also in the corporate world with organizations to really focus on helping young leaders to activate their personal courage. So I'm really excited to hear about that and how they can perform to their potential. Candace has had some wonderful experience in her own life. And when I first met her, she told me about her trips around the world, 20 countries, and is very clear to say that she did it as a woman of color, as you can see. And so what that experience was like, would love to hear a little bit about that today. And she has developed in her own life a lot of strategies, and she's going to share those and shares those with audiences. Candace does have a book that's being repurposed by a very big publishing house, so we're not going to make the current version available, but I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit about that. And in the spirit of getting things done and showing courage, she also is a serial entrepreneur and has a greeting card and gift company called Pep Talker that you should check out online. So I could go on and on, as they say, but I want to turn it over to my good friend Candace and just say hi. First of all, make sure we hear you, okay? Yeah, we hear you. Okay, you never know about technology. You're always calming me down with that. So let me throw the first question, and we want to make this a conversation. So we're hoping we're going to be able to see your comments, and you can contribute to this as well. So one question for you to start with, Candace, is would you consider yourself on the spectrum of introversion, an introvert, an ambivert? Where do you stand on that?
I would consider myself an introvert ambivert. I mean, I know we can't pick two, but let me explain. I lean introverted. I've taken the personality test and my results come back that I'm 60% introverted. So I don't know if you would consider that ambivert or just a straight up introvert, but yeah, I am certainly in the middle or lean towards more introversion than extroversion.
And when you talk about that or see yourself that way, and I always say to people, it's about how you identify, not so much about the label. What we've talked about, what would you say are the key qualities that really tip you over more some into the introverted side?
Yeah, for me, it is, a lot of people confuse me maybe with an extrovert because I can get on stages, I can be in front of people. But when those things are over, after I've spoken to the big crowd or I've, led a meeting, I am itching to be by myself after that. I'm itching to go back to my hotel room or my room or whatever and be by myself. So, yeah, I really do recharge and I really do kind of recoup the energy that I've expended from being in front of other people by myself. That's how I like to do it.
Did you have to learn that over time? A lot of my clients talk about like they didn't know that in the beginning. You know, they were unconscious and they thought they had to keep up with their friends who were more out there, and they got exhausted. Did you have to learn the hard way, or could you talk about how you got to that point?
I probably did have to learn the hard way in some regards. I mean, I think the world in general rewards extroversion. I certainly know the workplaces that I've worked for and led it reward extroversion. So I think I tried to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, but it always felt awkward, Jennifer. It always felt awkward and unnatural.
Yes.
And so the more I came to know myself as I just leaned into this is what I need, you know, to be able to recharge and perform.
Right. Well, you talk, you know, I'm going to switch a few questions down in terms of these trips you took that were solo. I run into people, and I would say it's not so much introversion versus extroversion, but people that are women I know who have to get over that hump of traveling alone. I know for me, my story was even as an extrovert, you know, doing a lot of work solo on the road for years, training. That's really when I got in touch with that side of myself. I had no choice, you know, being in hotel rooms. It's actually where I wrote most of my books, was on airplanes and hotel rooms. And I started to really think twice as an extrovert about, boy, there's something to appreciate here. So I wonder, was it just comfortable for you to do that, to just take off and go, you know, out into the world? And maybe you could share a little bit of how that journey started.
Yeah. So the idea, I actually started traveling globally, internationally pretty late. I would consider it late. I was 27. I know a lot of people do study abroad and that kind of thing in college, or they travel with their families. So I consider it a little bit late. And when I decided to take my first trip to Indonesia, I knew I wanted to go for a period of time. And I didn't want to be bogged down with trying to get a group of friends together. And also I didn't want to be bogged down by doing things other people wanted to do. I wanted it to be a very eye-opening trip for myself. So I am comfortable with the idea of being by myself. I am comfortable being, you know, in my own space. And so I think for me, the biggest thing was just getting over to going to a place that I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't being by myself, that wasn't the thing that caused me concern.
You also told me, I think, a story about when you were in Indonesia that struck you. Do you remember what that was? It was a while ago, and it was just how you were the only woman of color. And
absolutely. Yeah. So being in Indonesia, I was absolutely the only person of color, one of the few people of color in Ubud, Indonesia, where I went. And so I did get a lot of stares. I did get a lot of people like making whispers to people that they were with. I even got some laughs. And initially I interpreted it as, you know, just unwelcoming. I interpreted it as, you know, why are you here? You know, you don't look like anybody else that's here. But honestly, it was just curiosity. I mean, you know, a lot of times being a Black woman, one of the things, that we have to do as women of color is reframe in order to survive. So, you know, I really honed my reframing skills through travel and just came to understand that these people in Indonesia are curious about this person who doesn't look like them and she's traveling by herself. So I did learn a lot about myself and gain some critical leadership skills through travel.
Reframing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You said reframing. So kind of shifting the way you were perceiving that in your head.
Absolutely. I mean, travel, you know, at least for women of color or Black women who haven't traveled all their life. I mean, travel is one of the things that has helped me to just completely reframe. And sometimes it's a survival technique and sometimes it's just a growth technique, that everything isn't as it seems. And so I had to do that a lot in the corporate space, and I learned that skill through travel. So
say a little more about that. Everything is not as it seems. You mean like people are not being biased if they're acting to you a certain way? They just might be obnoxious. You know?
Absolutely. I mean,
I didn't know, you know, but we've had conversations about this. I'm just curious.
You know, let's be clear. There are a lot of things that happen, you know, being a Black woman. I will say that my racial identity is cued first in this country, in a lot of spaces that I'm in. Yeah. So I think about race. If something happens, my reaction and how I interpret it often goes through the filter of race and my racial identity. And so I had to learn, and oftentimes, you know, those experiences could be racial. But when you're in another country, when you're around people you've never seen before, they've never seen you before, and you just are having a new experience, I've learned that it's not always about race. It's just it could be really about curiosity. It could be really about wonder and awe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have, learned to kind of refilter some of the experiences that I have and ask myself more questions.
Wow. Yeah, that's really incredible. I'm just thinking about myself and how you talked about junior year, went off to England. I never had to worry about how people perceive me, I mean, it's just incredible. What women of color and people of color need to deal with every day. I mean, you're thinking, duh. Any thoughts about how, as we stay on this topic, let's go to the workplace. I was at a session I was giving a few years ago, and I remember it was a scientific institute, and I was giving people ideas. It was mostly women about how they can be assertive. And I remember a woman of color raised her hand and she said, well, that's all well and good, but and she was respectful, but she said that if I do that in my lab, I'm going to get labeled. And I've already had it happen as the angry Black woman. So, I mean, I've heard that story and that expression a number of times. So any thoughts about how, as a Black woman, what your experience was and what you would suggest? Are there any tips or approaches?
Yeah, I think that I've certainly heard that label and had that label attached to myself in the workplace. And usually that comes from just, speaking up and sharing ideas as other people would do. But because maybe, we do it more in a straightforward voice, or at least I do a more straightforward tone, it gets interpreted as something else, as being angry or being confrontational or whatever adjective you want to use. And so for me, one of the things just in my courage journey and speaking and coaching about courage that I've come to understand about myself is that, there are techniques to kind of change things and soften the way you say something. But at the end of the day, we are who we are. And so we can constantly try to change those things in the workplace to make it more palatable or comfortable for other people, or we can be who we are and try to teach people around us, how to engage with us. And so that's the path that I chose, is to teach people around me how to engage with me. And so, I think that it was just a constant being myself, hearing the label, but not taking the label personally in the workplace. And it's a different strategy for different people based upon the skills and brilliance you have. So
you did a lot of internal work, but what were the strategies you used, or what was an approach you took to teach somebody? Can you give it what that looked like when you said, I taught people how to work with me, or because you do a lot of work yourself and every person I've talked to of color, there's a term, and it's escaping me right now, where you have to continually flex who you are, to constantly be aware.
Yeah, it's a lot of
energy, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of asking questions. So I remember very clearly I had a boss who told me to watch my tone with him. And all I was doing was sharing my ideas and sharing why something that he thought I did, I had a different opinion about it. And so in the moment, in that conversation, it was literally asking questions about, tell me how how that example or how that particular incident led you to believe that, or tell me why you think, I'm being confrontational in this conversation. Yeah. So that's what I mean by, helping people to kind of dismantle the stereotypes and biases that they have that they don't recognize by asking questions, or getting them to engage in the conversation and getting them to engage in their bias that they're not even considering.
So you're helping make them responsible too for their statements. And those are some good, I remember lessons in how you receive feedback. When a boss says, like, you don't show a positive attitude, or you're not a team player. I mean, what the hell does that mean, right? And so instead of, like in my earlier days, I would get angry and just label them as being ignorant. You know, I think what you're saying is you probe more. You find out, what does that look like? What what behaviors am I exhibiting that says to you that I'm being confrontational?
Right.
Hold them accountable for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's just one way, is to engage people in their own, like, how did you even come to this idea, and asking questions to get them to think more deeply, whether they do that with you in the conversation or do it by themselves after you get off the phone or leave their presence. So That is
When-
one way. And I will say, Jennifer, just really quickly,
Yeah, sure, no rush.
when I decided like this is who I am, and I will say I worked for an organization where I felt a little bit more comfortable, being who I am, even if I was labeled as the angry Black woman. But I decided like this is who I am. These are ideas that I have. This is kind of like this, asking questions and challenging whether or not this is the right process that we should be using. Like this is who I am. And so there are absolutely techniques where we can make that more palatable for people to understand. But I kind of just decided that, maybe I'm not going to get promoted as quickly as other people because this is my approach, but this is my approach and this is who I am. So that's kind of what I decided. And I will say by the end of my time at Chipotle, I was leading the entire, team across the country. So it's about teaching people like, this is who I am. And it may take you a little bit longer to get promoted. At least I was okay with that. I had accepted that because I'm not going to change fundamentally who I am and why you
have your own integrity. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not able to see the comments, but if there are any, perhaps you can pick them up or we'll respond. Yeah, no, thank you for all of that. And you did, so growing up, you grew up in South Carolina, am I right? In Columbia area? Okay. So that kind of informs how we are, where we come from, right?
Yeah.
So how did you, as you moved in through the world, how did you kind of land on this topic of courage? Just for the folks who are out there, Candace and I met through the National Speakers Association. One of the things they always talk about when you enter into that, when you kind of make that pivot into professional speaking, is it's very important to pick a lane. Do you remember that, Candace?
Yeah.
That phrase, right now everybody's going, I don't know what lane I want to be on. But for you, your lane became courage. And it was that, tell me about how that occurred, that you chose courage.
Yeah, I mean, I really over the years have come to understand courage as a superpower. I think it's, a superpower that we all have access to, but we don't flex because we don't talk about it enough. I think in popular culture or just in our organizations, we talk about fearlessness, or we try to lead people to become fearless. And really what we really want them to do is become courageous. So what I did was I took a look over all the things, a lot of the things that I've been able to do in my life, which is quitting jobs, challenging bosses, advocating for myself for salary, traveling around the world, writing a book, and on and on and on, and kind of paired that with the courage that I didn't really understand at that time in my childhood, but understanding that I had to be courageous, and I was courageous as a, young Black girl growing up in South Carolina in the South, and was met with so many different stereotypes from white people about who I should be, about Black people about who I should be, and really trying to form an identity for myself and courageously kind of being the person that I am. So I put all of my experiences together and really came to the point where I wanted to help other people kind of access their personal superpower, which is their personal courage, to help them perform better in school and work and life. So that's what I do. I mean, I think courage is foundational. Maya Angelou said courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, we can't practice any other virtue consistently. And so I'm out here preaching courage, and I really do think that it is important for us to become the people that we need to become.
So introverts who oftentimes get the message that, what you have to say, it's more important for me to speak over you. You're quiet. There's a lot of bias that goes. How do you connect that? How do you think introverts could use more courage, and what could they do to be more courageous?
I think it ranges. I think it can range from, yes, conjuring your courage to have your voice and perspective honored and heard in a meeting. And so I think courage could definitely manifest in that way. But I also think as introverts, it's the courage to own your unique brilliance. I think that our workplaces in the world tells us that we need to be more extroverted. And Jennifer, I can tell you, in a meeting, I can certainly speak up. But after the meeting is over, I didn't want to go out with my coworkers to drink or eat or whatever. And so I think it's important that we own our brilliance, whatever we bring to the table, which is probably not extroversion. There's a lot of things talents and tools that we have, and I think that we've got to own them. and bring them to the table.
And I see you do that all the time. I love that you're sharing this because I'm getting more insight into how you operate behind this is you. This is you, really. And one thing I think that people don't realize, and it's always, I learned this about my husband. Like, I realize he has so many friends, but they're not like superficial friendships. They're more deep. Like, I remember his mom, my mother-in-law, saying, we never understood how Billy's phone was always ringing off the hook because he never talks. He's so quiet. But introverts tend to have more focused, deep relationships. And every time you and I are connecting, you're always telling me about this girlfriend or that. And I watch you on Instagram, and like, you have relationships with people. So I'd love you to just chat a little bit about that, about like, you have girlfriends.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's not like you're isolated. And so how important are relationships, both on the personal front and at work? Because I assume that you also connected with people there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think relationships are critical any and everywhere, for introverts as well. And so, if you looked into my relationships, Jennifer, a lot of them were formed, in high school and middle school. Like my best friends from high school and middle school, we still talk all the time.
Wow.
Planning trips right now. So those are, deep friendships.
And by the way, I bet you're planning them.
I am planning it.
Well, you have the confidence now. I mean, you've been to 25 countries, but you would anyway, probably.
And so I think relationships are very critical. And actually, I've tried to develop, those deep friendships and relationships with friends, in now my adulthood, and they're harder. They're a little bit harder because people are looking for different things in friendships. But I think for me, and probably other introverts too, it's really critical to have those deep relationships.
Right. And you had a big life event happen this year, which you're a planner and you plan, but this one you had to really pivot. Tell everybody what happened. And I love what you said about, do you know what I'm talking about, or have you forgotten already?
I'm like, what
life event? All right. I'm going to have you guess. Okay.
Okay.
It happened in Colombia. It was like 6 months ago or maybe 8 months ago. And
that I got married.
Just got married this year, but I know. Usually it's a few more years before you get more complacent.
I'm like, what happened?
No, but I love how you made that a very intimate, talk about what you did there, like how you shifted.
Really, and that was a whole lesson in and of itself, is you just have to go with the flow. But we planned for a wedding where 180 people had, said that they were coming, and we were planning for that. And then the pandemic came, and we made adjustments, and we ended up having a wedding for 65 people, socially distanced, in a big museum. So don't worry, people, if you're listening, in a big, museum that could accommodate way more people than that. And so it was a beautiful ceremony, and we're glad that we did it and that it's over.
And it's over with. And a lot of people are looking back on this year with experiences like that and others. And what would you say you have learned about yourself, whether regarding courage or introversion, what from this past year that's been so challenging? What would you say has been a lesson?
One of the things that I will say, not necessarily about the wedding, although I had several lessons, is that, the pandemic and being virtual, I feel like, leveled the playing field for a lot of employees in terms of extroverted employees and introverted employees. And really allowed introverts to work in their space, probably be more productive than they ever have done or have been. And also find ways to connect with people one-on-one, which is what I prefer anyway. And so I will say that, I have kind of strengthened and honed those skills to not necessarily try and make the points or conversation or contribution in groups, but connect with people one-on-one, have more meaningful conversations with people. And the pandemic kind of forced that. So I will say that that's one thing that I've been able to strengthen, and I bet other introverts have been able to strengthen as well.
Yes. And you made a comment to me, I think we were discussing about there might be like a generational difference. Everybody's talking about, are we going back hybrid? And you were saying that you think maybe people from the boomer generation like myself would prefer to have that face-to-face. Is that something you still feel?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the pandemic has revealed to a lot of companies and a lot of organizations that you can have a lot of intense production going on among your teams without being in a physical space. But I do think that the boomer generation, who are not necessarily used to thinking about the idea of remote work, I do think that they believe that it can kind of make company culture not what it used to be. It can kind of make it blow up. And I do think that millennials and Gen Z are like, absolutely not. We're being productive. We can connect with people. And this is something that we need to consider moving forward with, this type of work in the future. And so I think that, it should absolutely be an option that most companies are considering, is to allow their employees to continue to work from home. But I think the boomer generation probably feels differently.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, the issue about hybrid, that there might be two camps of people in the office, if they choose to go back, might have, an advantage over those working at home. And I wonder about the implications on diversity, equity, inclusion with this virtual space. Do you think, I know there have been a lot of challenges we've read about, people of color and people that are non-dominant groups of struggling, to do remote work. So it's kind of all still sorting out now, I think.
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah.
So, and we're getting a little close to the end here. So I was curious if you want to share with folks anything that we can keep in mind as we really strengthen our own courage muscle. I'm going to a sneak peek of the new book. I'm sure it'll have some of the other ones. There's just some great quotes in here, like boxes were made for takeout and donations to Goodwill, not you.
Yes.
And chances are like wigs ready to be snatched. I really like that one. Is that going to go in the new book?
Yeah. So just really quickly about the book.
Please.
A lot of young professionals and a lot of young leaders. And I will say that courage is not a sexy topic. I do think that in our workplaces and in schools and in organizations, we need to be talking more about courage than probably anything. But when I talk to young people, what I noticed is that there needed to be an entry point into the conversation, because it's not a sexy conversation. And so what I did was I wrote a book of 100 quotes, and I personified courage, and I gave courage a voice. So if your personal courage was talking to you in little sound bites, what would your courage be saying?
I like it.
A book of quotes. And I think, the book will come back out. It's not available right now. But as we all move forward and we think about courage, I think it's really important to, consider what are the things that we want to do, first of all? What are the things that we want the courage to do? Because I think that's a question that a lot of us don't even think about. What seems too risky or too confrontational or too scary to do that you want to? And then it's a question of looking at the risk involved, your reasons for wanting to do it, and your internal resources, which is really your confidence and your competence. But the first step, Jennifer, is even asking the question, because I don't consider it enough. What do you have the courage to do?
So anything on the horizon for you for your next, I know you've got a lot of projects you're managing. The book is certainly one, but that you're going to have to step up and show courage for. Anything come to mind that is on your horizon?
Yeah, I'm starting a podcast, which, so that's something that I'm definitely going to have to step up and, whenever we are doing something where the possibility of being judged is a risk, I think courage is really sounding its alarm, like we need it more than ever. So, whenever we're putting out new creative ideas into the world, I think I'll need to flex my courage for that. Just getting the podcast out and hoping people like it, but really not focusing on that and just doing it.
But they will, and if you don't follow Candace Dobie, and this is your name on Instagram, I highly recommend it. And other places people can get in touch with you and stay part of your community that you might suggest, besides Instagram?
Instagram, LinkedIn, right here on LinkedIn. And also, go to the website, CandaceDobie.com, and we can definitely connect through the newsletter, which I send out twice a month.
Well, I think, Candace, this is just, I'm so thrilled you were my inaugural guest on this, and I could think of nobody else I wanted to have to share her honesty, her truth, be authentic, and show what a really strong introverted / ambiverted leader looks like in this day and age. And you inspire me all of the time. So I can't wait to continue our conversations, and I hope that the folks out there will do the same. So thank you. Is there anything else you want to say, or have we covered? Do you need a nap now?
Listen, after this is over, Jennifer, I will kind of just be in my little office.
It's a Friday. I pulled you out on a Friday. And by the way, these conversations, we have a lot of laughter in them. So I think we all need to remember that as well. Thank you so much. And everybody out there, TGIF, thank you for joining us and spending the time today. And don't be a stranger. Look out for our next announcement. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.